Buenas tardes. Estábamos dando unos minutos de cortesía para que se vayan incorporando las personas que se han inscrito al seminario de hoy. Tenemos en torno a 260 participantes registrados, así que bueno, va llevando un poquito de tiempo que todo el mundo se incorpore, pero en aras al respeto del tiempo de todo el mundo, pues vamos a empezar. Good afternoon. My name is Rosa Gallego, and I'm Director for International Relations and Community Foundations at the Spanish Association of Foundations. I want to welcome you all to this session, Artificial Intelligence, Opportunity or Risk for Foundations. This is the third webinar of the series Conecta y Pregunta, which is a webinar series that we organize with ANSBAD, a foundation that fights for the right to health in Africa. On this occasion, we are meeting to talk about a topic which I feel is of general relevance for all of us, artificial intelligence, but probably of very specific relevance for foundations and for civil society at large. And this is the reason why we've chosen this topic to talk about today with two prominent speakers in the topic. In the 60 minutes or probably 56 minutes ahead, we want to have the opportunity to understand what is the current status of artificial intelligence, broad picture about what this means and where it is at the moment. A little bit of foresight on the future, what this entails basically for our sector, and the opportunities and risks that artificial intelligence have for the work of foundations. Opportunities that we hope that we can, anticipate and make the best use of them, and also to anticipate to the risks that artificial intelligence may have for the work of foundations. I'm going to start by welcoming our speakers today. I'm very glad to have with us Lucy Bernholz. Lucy is a principal investigator at Stanford University Center for Philanthropy and director of the Digital Civil Society Lab. Lucy, thank you very much. Good morning to you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's delightful to be with you all. And thank you for doing this in English.
No, our pleasure. So don't be too scared when I mix technical terms. So excuse me, not a technical in this sense. And I also want to welcome Richard Benjamins. Richard is Chief Artificial Intelligence and Data Strategist at Telefonica, where he currently leads the implementation of ethical use of artificial intelligence for the company. Hi, Richard. Hello. Thank you very much for being with us.
Hello, good afternoon, and very glad to be here.
Thank you very much. You all have seen their bios. There's more specification about the great work they do and all the projects they are leading or have led in the past. This is all in the program, but we're not going to take a lot more time with introductions because the very interesting thing today is to listen to them. To our audience, I would just like to remind you that this session is going to be recorded and that it will be shared with subscribed participants after the session. So just for you to know. The session will run in a way that Richard and Lucy will tell us a little bit about the work they are currently doing in the domain of artificial intelligence, and then they will engage in a conversation which will basically touch upon this topic and how it will help or hinder the work of foundations, from their different perspectives of the different work that they are doing. Participants can use the chat function. We will be gathering questions during the session. If you feel more comfortable writing the questions in Spanish, please feel free to do so. We will be gathering the questions and we will devote the last 20 minutes of the session to answer to them. So, well, without further ado, I would like Richard to take the opportunity to tell us a little bit of the work that he is currently doing. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosa. And again, good afternoon or good morning, everybody around there. Yes, I'm happy to explain a little bit the exciting topics that I'm currently working on. I'm actually in the area of artificial intelligence and big data since many years. I did my PhD already in cognitive science and artificial intelligence in the 90s. So at that time, nobody knew about this technology. It was very hard to explain what it was about. And today, it's even in the mouth of every person, and in the media, in the press. So I've been working for many years in commercial areas of artificial intelligence and big data, trying to improve business, optimize marketing campaigns, understand better the customers, the segments, optimizing a lot of processes. But the last 5 years or 6 years, I've been devoted more to how can you use this technology for the greater good? So what we call big data for social good, or AI for good. I've started a department at Telefonica in 2016 with this the same name, where we started to bring to the society projects related to the Sustainable Development Goals. So helping relieve and humanitarian disasters. We already started working on propagation of viral diseases, which we have now with COVID, and several of the projects we did also with the foundations, like Foundation of Telefonica. In general, the focus is on how can we better use privately held data, in addition to public and open data, to solve large problems in the world. You can think, as I said, about the Sustainable Development Goals, but also about evidence-based policy making. So how can you change large decision making that governments have to do, and more based on facts and less on, let's say, political convictions or intuitions or insights. Of course, it's a combination of both, but current state of play is that governments are, especially, mostly, at least in Europe, are not taking all those decisions based on evidence, but much more on other factors. As one of the highlight projects that we are currently doing, and to some extent it's unfortunate because it's actually sharing anonymized and aggregate data with the European Commission in the fight against COVID. So there are 17 mobile network operators who are daily sharing this information with European Commission. They share it with the European Center for Disease Control, and they have a scenario tool where they can simulate different vaccination programs in light of mobility patterns of people, lockdowns, and also propagation factors and the vaccination strategies, and of course the positive cases. So all that together is a tool where they can actually better plan. And currently now, with all the release of the limitations for traveling, etc., it's very important that the right information is there on a very short basis, almost on a daily basis, so they can update their strategies and decisions. It's happening in reality to some extent, but it should happen much more. So currently, and that's one of the challenges, is that this is mostly based on philanthropy. It's all pro bono effort. There's no budget involved, and that means that this is a best effort, a best effort initiative. And I mean, you can't manage a pandemic on the best effort. It has to be really a serious initiative with budgets, with teams, and that's what we're working on for future pandemics, once we are out of this. So that's one thing I am working on. I'm also working, as Rosa said, I'm responsible for the use of ethical artificial intelligence in Telefonica. We issued already in 2018 a series of principles, or an ethical code of how we want to use this technology. It should not discriminate, it should be fair, it should be transparent and explainable, it should be based on humans, it should have privacy and security, and of course, it's also work if you work with providers, it should also be applied to them. Yeah. So we are now implementing that strategy, and it's a tough thing, but it's very important. And especially now with in Europe, there is this new artificial intelligence regulation, which the European Commission issued. And so all this will become even more important, and will become like the data protection law, that it's not that you do it because you want to do it yourself, but for certain areas it is compulsory to do it, and that triggers a whole set of changes within all kinds of organizations, not only companies, also public administration, and of course foundations and associations and the like. So apart from that, and because I also feel it's important, I've also been one of the co-founders of a not-for-profit association that is focused on the social and ethical impacts of AI, because we thought it's important there be an independent voice of citizens, of civil society, to speak about these things, because up to now, this is a discussion of large companies and of government institutions, and of course also of associations, but literally the civil society is so far left out of this. So we wanted to be a voice of that. And in this area, we are focused around different sectors, because applying this technology in one sector like finance or health or defense is not the same thing. You have different things that are important. And we're also applying it to transversal areas such as fairness, explainability, inclusive AI, privacy, relation, people, machines. So there's a range of things that you can work up, and we gather professional experts in AI and other related areas to talk and discuss about it, and to do projects such that with a wider society can benefit from those things as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. Well, a lot of information, very, very interesting. Lucy, will you tell us a little bit more? What's your current focus of work?
Sure. Thank you so much. And it's really, again, delightful to be with you. I'm calling in from Northern California, the ancestral lands of the coastal Miwok and Pomo people. And I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and future. So it's really great to hear what Richard is working on and the way he's going about it. And it's, as someone calling in from the United States, it's important to recognize the very different regulatory context within which work in Europe happens, as opposed to work in the US, where the regulatory environment on data and artificial intelligence and data collection and privacy is very, very different. It's essentially non-existent compared to what you're experiencing in Europe. And for that, I can say, as a citizen of the world, I'm grateful to the European Union. I want to back up a little bit, because I feel like a lot of these conversations get sort of assume we know what we're talking about when we use terms like artificial intelligence. And it's a very rapidly developing field, and as Richard knows. So I want to challenge everyone who's listening that every time I use the word data, to think of that as you the person, you the actual person, because most of the kinds of data that we're talking about, especially in the intersection here with civil society, is going to be data on people. It's going to be information about you, and it may appear as a cell phone number moving in a large database that can be looked at for mobility patterns, but each one of those data points is a human being. The other thing I want to do is sort of root this in experiences that each of us may have already had or have on a regular basis and not necessarily think about. So I can't see the audience, but if you've ever used your cell phone map to get from place A to B in a part of the world that you're not familiar with, and you punched in the origin point and the point of arrival and looked at the suggested routes from the starting point to the end point, you have just used artificial intelligence. And what's important about that, and the reason I think that example can be helpful to sort of start the conversation, is that if, like me, when you're traveling in another place, you're interested in the food, you're interested in the local shops, you're interested in meeting people, you don't have any ability when you plot your route on a phone map to actually use those values as things to help you find your way from A to B. You're guided by what the designer of the map app have decided are the important parameters. So at least again in the US, that tends to be things like, are there tolls on the road? Are there highways? Are there a way to avoid paying money or using highways? Those are kinds of the choices we're given as the person trying to get from the starting point to the end point. And it's a easy way, I hope, something that everyone's experienced, of seeing how the forces behind the designers and the data analysts and the people making the decisions behind the technology are in fact shaping the way you as a traveler get to experience the world. That technology could be designed in such a way that I could set it up so whenever I plot from A to B, it tells me where the best tapas restaurant is and where the local bookstore is, because that's actually what I care about. But I can't do that. I can only use the rules of the road, pun intended, that are built into the app. And that experience, that way that technology now works is very important to keep in mind, because again, the data are people, and what you've got are third parties making decisions about how to direct, in the map example, that person. So simple example, doesn't seem particularly complicated, but it is a way into sort of this bigger issue. And so one of the question to me is, what am I working on? Well, the big thing that I'm working on is something I've been working on for several years, which is how to help people in civil society, whether they're in not-for-profit organizations and foundations and in informal associations, understand the ways in which we are dependent, for the most part, on technologies that are designed by other enterprises, in most cases commercial companies, and the ways those digital dependencies shape our work. And understanding how that is working at the deepest level, not from a technological standpoint, but from a values standpoint, is critical to being able to succeed in today's world, because those that third level, the kind of invisible layer of decision-making happening by someone else, is shaping all of our work. And artificial intelligence, the application of third-party designed algorithms to make sense of large data sets, and again, data equals human beings here, complicates the way a not-for-profit organization, a foundation, can actually think about its space in the world, because a good number of the decisions and the parameters and the guardrails on what it can do are now being defined by these third parties. So the big project that we're working on, and I can give you a link in the chat, I could also show you the website, is a project called Upgrade, which is actually about helping people in nonprofits and foundations understand more from a values perspective and from the perspective of their organization's mission, what it means to be doing your work in a world where certain decisions are being made around your issue that you don't have visibility into. So let me give you some very specific examples, mostly from the US context, but again, probably transferable to Spain, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. People who work in the area of helping other people, nonprofits working to help other people get jobs, employment. Decisions about who gets hired nowadays are increasingly guided by algorithmic decisions made by artificially intelligent screening technology that screens through applications looking for certain qualities. They're not necessarily read by human beings. They're being read by and screened out by artificially intelligent powered machines. And knowing that, regardless of what skills you've taught people, if you can't help them get through the algorithmic screening process, your work won't help them get a job, which is the ultimate goal of most employment skill building. Same thing with benefit distribution. Same thing with vaccine distribution. These are decisions that we tend to think of as being made by human beings. And in democracies, we have built a series of design choices so that outside human beings can see and understand the decisions being made by the government or the corporation or the civil society organization, to understand how those decisions are made, particularly the government. The more we build into that system decision-making by algorithms written by third parties, using data, which is again, information on us as human beings, that we can't necessarily explain, the more we are basically ceding our ability as people to understand the decision-making process to a set of third parties over which we may have almost no influence. That's the big implication for democracy. The other implication for civil society organizations is that the issues you work on are being changed by these technologies, probably without your knowledge. Because while artificial intelligence in the media gets a lot of attention for, kind of big breakthrough possibilities, the fact is it's being used by decision makers all the time in small ways, much closer to the map app than in those big visible ways. And that we cannot fully understand how those decisions are made. What we do know at this point in time, for almost everything decisions that are being made based on large, again, here's the word, data sets about human beings, into which a set of instructions, algorithms are being used to help parse through those massive piles of data, is that they are biased and discriminatory. That's been established, either because the data, which comes from the past, is biased, and or because the algorithm is biased. And now bias has a lot of different meanings. It takes a lot of different forms, but we're putting two things together, and we are in many cases reifying, rigidifying the discriminatory nature of previously based human decision-making systems. So there need to be ways to prevent that. There need to be ways to say no more or not yet. A lot of technologies, a lot of times, because the values in both the government agency that might be implementing these tools or the business that is selling this analytic capacity is, as Richard talked about optimizing something, that value right there tends to be about efficiency, getting through a lot of information more quickly, and scale, getting through a lot of information, more information than a human can make sense of. But those two values, efficiency and scale, are rarely at the heart of what any nonprofit is actually doing. The values that nonprofits and foundations are after tend to be much more complicated ideas like justice or fairness or inclusion. And those are values that are very hard to teach a machine how to act on, because they're hard for us as humans to agree on. So we have at this very root level some complicating mismatches of values that we should not lose sight of at any stage in this process. We are increasingly dependent on these technologies. We have to understand where they may be bringing in values that are out of sync with our mission. And we need a way to be able to stop and say, not here, not now, not yet. And that's true across the set of issues that you may be working on. You could almost throw a domain at me, from education to hiring to arts and culture to immigration to health, you name it. And I can tell you where the mismatch comes at that basic level of data collection and analytic analysis. So with the upgrade project, that's what we're actually trying to help people understand at that level. Nobody needs to learn how to code software here. You need to think about the values of your organization. The one last thing I'll say here is that there are two things I want to add to that, just to sort of prime the pump for the conversation. One is to pick up on what Richard said, which is really important, that right now the efforts, for example, that he's engaged with COVID are philanthropically funded, and there's no financial sustainability strategy for that. That's really critical for us to think about in civil society, is where and how, who's going to make decisions about these things and how are they going to be maintained over time? Because in the commercial funding strategy, things get sort of fall out as quickly as they stop making money. And so what is the other thing? And then the other point I want to make is that for the most part, we ought to be thinking in civil society, at least in 2021, that when we're thinking about artificial intelligence and large data sets and the kinds of skills it takes to use them well, as Richard was talking about, we are not going to be using these things ourselves. They are going to be used on us. And more importantly, they're going to be used on the people we're trying to help. And so figuring out if they're being used on the people we're trying to help in a way that's in alignment with what we're trying to do is fundamentally our responsibility.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Well, I think, you know, at some point I feel we could close down the session now and start panicking or start doing a lot of homework. Well, not panicking, but probably it's interesting to be aware that sometimes, you know, when we feel that, you know, if I'm not using a technology, you know, what at least I need to acknowledge is that the technology can be used on the topics our foundation is working. We have a broad audience today. You know, among our participants, there are people that work on health issues, education, culture, etc., etc. So I think we're touching on many different things. You know, you've started talking about decision making by governments. With Richard said, you know, there is lack of data that can support some government decisions, and they are many times, you know, taken without the needed facts. And that will be one side of the spectrum. So decisions should be taken, you know, based on good information. The other side of the spectrum is when that information is used in a way or is biased or it is discriminatory, you know, it can lead to the wrong decisions. But what we know is that, you know, this is going to affect policy making. That's one thing. Another very important thing is that it's going to affect the beneficiaries of the organizations that we as foundations are working with. And another thing I take from having listened to both Richard and you, Lucy, is that, you know, if some of the artificial intelligence for good is a pro bono thing, you know, should foundations and people that believe, you know, that philanthropy can have a role in civil society start thinking that there are funding opportunities, you know, to get this done, well, in the way that, you know, acknowledges all the topics that you were talking. So I think it's, you know, the floor is set for a nice conversation. And Richard, I don't know where you want to take it. I think, you know, this whether artificial intelligence, you know, can help or hinder, you know, the work of civil society organizations, you know, maybe it could be a place to start the conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rosa. And yeah, very interesting to listen to Lucy. I actually completely agree with her on some points, on others not. But on the points, I completely agree that we need to upgrade a lot of people in the terms that they understand the technology, because currently it is on the news, it's on titles, headlines, but there's no subtleties. And so people have to understand, what can this technology do? What can it not do? What can it never do? And because, yeah, there are lots of myths. Yeah? I actually wrote a book on that, The Myth of the Algorithm, Tales and Truths of Artificial Intelligence, which explains this technology in terms of layman's terminology. What is the impact of this technology on 8 big areas in society, like health, the future of work, privacy, safety, singularity, collaboration of competition, etc. So I think there's a lot of hype, yeah, and a lot of alarmistic things that we need to understand. What is true, what is not true, what is half true, and then what is opinion, yeah? Because there are many things said, but there is no proof of whether it's true or not. But it's fine, it's okay to have an opinion, but as a citizen, you have to understand that it's an opinion of a person rather than a scientific fact. Yeah? And then I want to make one comment. I think we are ascribing too much to the technology in itself. Yeah? I mean, everything that is happening with, for instance, with GPS systems, Google Maps, Apple Maps, or whatever maps, is built by people, yeah, and by companies. It's not the technology itself that's doing things; it's people deciding, yeah, to do these things. Yeah, if Facebook is optimizing its algorithm for maximum engagement, and as a side effect that leads to the propagation of hate speech and fake news, it's a people decision to do that. Or at least it's a people decision to continue doing that. Yeah, it's not the technology as such that is at stake here. Now, of course, the technology is very powerful and it applies everywhere, and therefore you have to rethink many things. Yeah, but it's not that it's happening just because of the technology. No, there are people behind every single decision today, that technology is doing. And what people should do. You want to comment, Lucy, already?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I agree with you there, although even the fact that it's people is a little bit oversimplified. There are institutional incentives driving what those people can even do. And so definitely, this is the other reason why civil society needs to be paying attention, because in, you know, the most oversimplified understanding of Western liberal democracy, there's the marketplace, there's the government, and there's civil society. And right now, given the resources, the financial resources that are involved, the two parts of that are making those decisions, the institutional incentives that are leading in this race, if you will, are commercial and governmental. And civil society stands in, you know, however you want to put it, in contrast and balance. And so its values are not being instilled into those tools, yet it is dependent on those systems.
Yes, I completely agree with it. Yeah? But I mean, that problem or that situation was already true before we spoke about artificial intelligence. Yeah? So it's the market that is free and that is optimizing to some extent, or it's deciding what people do. Yeah? Of course, as I said, this is a powerful technology, and therefore probably the impact of the intersection of those two things leads to sometimes undesired situations. Yeah. I think another thing that I wanted to remark is that it is true that many of the data sets today are biased because our society is biased. If you just take any data set, for certain things, there are usually more of one group than another group. Whereas if you use this data set for training an algorithm and then you take decisions on the whole group of people, of course, you get biased decisions. But if you look at responsible use of the technology, there are all kinds of methodologies that help people and engineers and organizations to correct for that bias, and also to have an algorithm work on, let's say, non-biased data, and also check the output of the algorithm, whether actually the algorithm is not biased or not discriminating. Now, that is still initial work, yeah, but I'm convinced it will become much better within 5 years from now. And at least in Europe, part of this will be regulated. So as you said, access to essential services, public services, whether they are provided privately or publicly, even enrollment or employment, promotion, and firing of employees will be regulated. Yeah? So any company that is doing screening of CVs using AI technology and is not selecting someone before the system becomes available in the market, it has to pass a certain test. Actually, I'm reading now the regulation in detail. You have to do more than 120 things. Yeah? It's a huge amount of things that you have to do before you can even put it in the market. Yeah? Now that will completely change, at least here and in 3 years, yeah? Because this will take some time to get to be landed. So there are like 8 big areas, yeah, where they speak about those things that have impact on people's lives, yeah, and on society. And of course, if you see the discussions in companies versus governments versus civil society, well, some people say this is not strict enough. Yeah, companies say, "Wow, this is going to kill our business." So it's all different values, yeah, and different perspectives to look at the same thing. But I think it's important to recognize that this technology is not perfect. It makes a lot of errors. Yeah, any system in AI that is selecting people for certain things, yeah, or excluding people for certain things, makes an error by definition. Now you have to accept whether 80% or 70% or 90% is sufficient for that case. Yeah, and then you have to think about the errors can be false positives or false negatives. Now, which ones are more important? You have to make explicit decisions of those things. So if companies, and I'm not saying they're doing today, yeah, but they should and they will, if companies take all those decisions explicitly before they put something into the market, I'm sure then the news items, the headlines we see in the news will be much less. Yeah? Of course, they will not disappear because not every company and not every organization is the same. But I think there is a trend to make more responsible use of this technology in general. But of course, it's still the leaders and the early adopters who are doing that. Like 20 years ago, when you had to be green as a company, or 10 years ago, you had to have a fair supply chain. It's always some companies, some organizations that start first, but then the rest follows. And at some point in time, hopefully, it becomes business as usual.
So I want to build on that, Richard, because I appreciate your optimism. And again, I'm very cognizant of the different regulatory environment in which you're operating, and where a statement like you just made actually gives me hope and sounds plausible, which I'll be very honest, in the US, neither of those things exists. That there will be those kinds of regulations, or that there would be that kind of business behavior. The other thing to just keep in mind throughout that, and in fact, the question on the table is sort of, what do all this mean for civil society? And I'm looking also at the question in the chat. Civil society has no doubt played a key role in helping to shape that regulatory stance and nature in the EU, so that in fact, corporations, whether they think the 120 checkboxes are enough or are not, have to abide by them, right? And that is one of the key messages of this conversation, I hope, is that from a civil society perspective, from organizations and foundations and nonprofits that care about, living human beings and their quality of life and their human dignity, bringing that set of perspectives into these conversations, not only in the putting pressure on the regulators, but also ideally working as you suggested with your the organization you've created, into the design of the systems and the collection of the data and the intended purpose of the applications, is a critical role for civil society to play. Where else are those voices going to come from? I'd love to think that every corporation throughout Europe and throughout the world was ultimately going to put that high of value on human dignity and diversity and disparate impact on different populations. But I'm not there. I'm nowhere near there. They will not make those decisions above and beyond their actual institutional obligation to make a profit. So that pressure and that access and that voice is critical. We also have to recognize that the technology and our knowledge and our understanding of how to build these systems, actually, as you've said, Richard, is not as advanced as some of the hype, but that has not stopped the technologies from being implemented. So let me give you a very simple case, which is just to demonstrate the difference between what's possible for a machine and what's possible for human decision makers. Most algorithms that have to make a decision about a person have been coded by other human beings, as Richard's aptly said, to see gender as a binary choice. There are males and there are females. And machines love binary choices. And humans have built machines that love binary choices, right? But humans don't come in binaries. And gender is just one example. Race is another. Religion is another, ethnicity is another. All of these things where we have to, in order to do what we know how to do with algorithmic analysis and data, we have to impose these limits that we as humans look around us and say, oh, that's not who is here. The diversity of the human experience is much more complicated than that, but we have to tell the machines to do this or that. And you build and you build and you build and you build systems, and they become increasingly out of sync with exactly the human populations that we're trying to bring up. The other thing that makes that gap really important is that the people who are, for the most part, making those choices and designing those systems, from the data collection to the analysis, do not reflect the diversity of the human population they're trying to capture in these systems. Civil society is a possible pathway there as well, but we need to actually recognize that there are compromises we make. There are just small decisions that may not feel like they matter much unless you happen to be one of those people who doesn't fit into either the male or female box, in which case that choice right there has just excluded you as a human being from the analysis. And we need to recognize that we are adding up those decisions inside companies and inside governments where the value systems are out of alignment with what civil society is after, and they're accumulating. And we may in fact be diverging more than we're aligning. So while the science and how to actually collect the data and make these decisions is still catching up to an awareness of just how rich and complicated human beings actually are, that has not in the slightest stopped companies from selling those tools as quickly and rapidly as they possibly can. So we know they don't work, yet we're putting them in place. And in the United States, the perfect example of that is facial recognition technology. We know this technology doesn't work on our population, on human beings. It doesn't work, yet we're selling it all over the place, and we're installing it all over the place because someone is making a decision that a 60% fail rate on Black and brown people is acceptable. That's failing. That's technology that doesn't work, yet we're selling it and putting it all over the place. So there's a whole, I think, I love being in conversation with Richard because he's more optimistic that these different value systems can be aligned somehow. But what I see are the tensions and the harms, the real today, everyday harms. And I'm hopeful that civil society will recognize that it's part of this complicated system and has a role to play in mitigating those harms. But in some cases, I think the mitigation is flat out refusal, that there are certain technologies that shouldn't be used.
I think, Lucy, we have to be more nuanced than when we speak about this technology. If I do like this, I can just see it. Yeah, so it opened up my iPhone based on facial recognition. Yeah. So that's
you're a white man, Richard.
Yeah, but
the technology has a 90% accuracy rate for white men and lower than a 40% accuracy rate for Black women. Why is that successful technology?
That was in the past, yeah. So when they started, indeed, yeah, the technology was not trained well, but now it's already much better. Yeah? So if you look at research, it has gone up. So it's the white men first, then it's white women, then it's Black men, and then it's Black women. Yeah. That's
so, but stop right there, Richard. Stop right there. Why is that hierarchy of accuracy okay?
No, I'm not saying it's okay. I'm just saying I can explain why it is. Because the machines are trained not with the right amount of data of the group. So that's, but I mean, it's possible to avoid this. If there is more attention in the development process to make it happen.
Okay, well, we can go down that path as well, but I think it's actually.
I'm just going to, I'm the only function I have today is to be mindful of time, and we've got only 15 minutes to go. I would like to take a couple of questions that have been in the chat. I don't know if you can see them, otherwise I can read them loud, and also maybe. After answering these questions, I think it will be very interesting also to touch a little bit upon, what are the opportunities, for which things foundations should be looking for, how can it enhance their work? How can it actually, help them to know more about the problems they're trying to tackle? What it will take, it will take to maybe merge private-owned data together with open data sets. How can philanthropic organizations that maybe are not too big in size, maybe form consortia to exploit data on a certain topic. So I would like you to talk a little bit on the opportunities, because I think we also need to to be aware that opportunities are and how they can make the best use of them.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Well, I think there are many opportunities, yeah, and even there are opportunities using this technology without looking at data that is based on people. Yeah, so there's a lot of sensors data. You can do a lot of things with climate change, looking at all kinds of data, satellite images, data that is already publicly published. Take also into account that any data that is almost published by national statistic offices, the basis of this data is surveys with people. Yeah? So it's all coming down to people, data from people. Of course, it's anonymized, it's aggregated, and there's no way to identify certain people. But all statistics about the failure rate of students, the dropout rate of students, it's all statistics that you can read everywhere. Yeah? But it's based on. But all this information, and it's a lot of information that is actually not in statistics, that you can still use to improve the specific mission of a foundation. So I think it's a matter of data literacy, and then there is the opportunity for foundations and not-for-profits to not make the same mistakes like the big companies have made and are still making. Yeah. So be careful if you work with data. Be careful that your data is not biased, and if your data is biased, identify that and try to build synthetic data that makes your data balanced. And if you look at simply automatic translation, yeah, if you translate the Spanish, if you translate nurse to Spanish nurse, you get usually the female version. Yeah? You got in the past. Now what companies are now doing, because they've learned it, they're actually adding synthetic data where there are a lot of female doctors in the text. Yeah? So she with doctor, so that the algorithm, if it learns, then it doesn't learn only the male relation, but also the female relation, and the other way around. Yeah. So life is not fair. Yeah? And if you want technology to be fair, you have to change something on the basis. Yeah. If you are aware of that, you can make it happen. You make it fairer. So I think there's an opportunity to do that. But I think data literacy for such organizations is very important, because the companies, the organizations that have the ability to hire those people with those technology, those are big companies. Yeah, they have big budgets and they have big teams. Now, if you're in a not-for-profit, you don't have even a simple IT person running your internal IT. So let alone talk about those kinds of things. So I think that is a problem. But once you are a bit, you can identify even your own data, to manage that in the right way and create value for that. That's already a challenge. But there are organizations, it's like a not-for-profit called DataKind. It's based in the US, in the UK, in several countries, that provide pro bono data services to not-for-profits. Yeah? So that's an opportunity for all organizations, if they want to work with this technology in a responsible way, to move forward.
And I agree with some of that. Although I want to sort of be realistic for most foundations and nonprofits, really around the world. If you think about the amount of data that it takes to be able to do even the mathematical analysis of whether there's bias in the data. And I'd be careful because I'm speaking in English. Most of the audience is originally Spanish speaking. There's translation issues, but bias is a word that means very different things to a mathematician and a humanist. That word alone has different meanings. There's statistical bias, there's prejudice, there's very different things there. Most nonprofits and foundations aren't going to be building or don't have the data or the questions that would require this kind of analysis that they do it themselves. Some of them do, some of them, but the vast majority of them are not going to start hiring data scientists or even use, and I used to sit on DataKind's board, needing that kind of data science talent for the kinds of things they're working on, a small percentage of them. But for the most part, it is the context in which they are working, which is being affected by these tools and these capacities. And so I agree with you that being able to understand what is meant when a company says, we have an ethical data or an ethical AI program, and this is what we're doing, and this is what this means, and this is how this follows through in our tools, and this is how it affects you, is critically important for a nonprofit or a foundation. Most of them would make a giant step forward if they took that step. I would challenge most people on the call to ask, have you ever even read the contracts you've signed about data with the vendors you currently use? Because let's start with where they are, not with what, Google can do, but with where these organizations are. And this again, back to the Upgrade Initiative, most of the organizations, I'm assuming on this call, are using software now to manage their payroll or their human resources or their grant making or to communicate with their board, and haven't even bothered to look at the contractual arrangements they've made about their data for what they're doing now. Now, where does that get tied up with artificial intelligence? Well, again, I can't speak directly to the Spanish context. You can answer this question, but in the United States right now, the big hullabaloo in fundraising, the fundraising software world, is artificially intelligent fundraising software. What on earth is that? What does that mean? Who's making what decisions about what people? If we could get nonprofits and foundations to take a step in that direction, we'd be getting there. To your other work, Richard, I do before we end, I think you are directly involved in one of the most important things that is happening, which is with the civil society organization you've created about artificial intelligence, and trying to bring in those voices and bring in that expertise about human diversity, human dignity, education, immigration, human rights, all of that expertise firmly lodged in the foundation and nonprofit sector needs to be sitting in decision-making roles as possible new applications of artificial intelligence are even thought about and designed. Trust it. I mean, it's always amazed me while we're better off launching a product that we know, back to the facial recognition, to be a 60% fail rate and waiting for the backlash of that, allowing people to get harmed in the interim, rather than inviting in people and changing and building the technology so it's more likely to be harmful, less likely to be harmful from the get-go, rather than go through this pendulum of launch the product, cause the harm, adjust the backlash, write the regulations. That's the pattern. And they're real people at the end of that harm. It's not imaginary. It's real human beings getting harmed. And again, I'm making a big assumption that the people on this call prefer that people don't get harmed. So I think there's a way to reimagine how we even create these possibilities driven by a set of values based in human rights, human dignity, and not based in profit or state surveillance. Those being the two primary motives of the two sectors that are busy creating this stuff right now. whole different possibility, whole different future possible if we based it in those values rather than tweaking and adapting and hoping nobody notices the harm we're doing. But I'm not the optimist here. Richard's the optimist.
You should come to Europe then.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that would make me optimistic, but it would get me out of here.
Right, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask the audience to review the chat, because both Lucy and Richard have put here, the resources, the things in which they are working. So one of them is the book that Richard published about the algorithms that he just mentioned. So that is where you can find the book, and also Lucy has put the upgrade initiative. I'm assuming, Lucy, that the upgrade initiative only works with organizations in the US, or?
No, what we're actually building with those resources, and we'd love to get them translated into as many languages as possible, but these are resources that are intended to be taken and used by other organizations wherever they're useful. So our specific sort of audience we have in mind here is both nonprofits and foundations directly, but also capacity building organizations. So people who do strategic planning, people who help organizations think about their organizational structure, are free to use those resources, adapt them as they're useful, because what we're ultimately trying to get at is helping nonprofits and foundations understand the many ways that being digitally dependent requires them to think differently about their work and about the skills they need inside and the kind of change they can make. So integrating those resources into existing capacity building and technical assistance work is what we're really after. And if there are people in Spain who want to help translate them or create more of them that are specific to your context, we'd love to talk to them.
We do have a specific space in our website for digital transformation at the Spanish Association, so we make sure that the information is there. And I assume that some of this material, could be the starting point maybe for conversations at the board level, for organizations that have never talked about the topic, because they are not maybe a technological foundation, so they are not thinking about this, but maybe it's a way to start thinking what could be the impact. I mean, we do have questions here. One of them is how can we introduce the values into the algorithm? I think part of it has been answered. I don't know if any of you want to add something else on that.
I'll just put, I mean, Richard is leading work in that direction where you're changing who's engaged in actually thinking through, again, both the purpose and the design of the systems. There's the European Union AI fund, it's called the European AI Fund, has actually been is a philanthropic initiative that's seeding people together. It's seeding organizations that work specifically on algorithmic bias with people who are experts in different populations and different issues, in what we at the lab refer to as integrated advocacy, where you're taking the different kinds of expertise and seating them in as equal partners in thinking about where these tools work, what they work for, and where perhaps they are simply not ready. The other thing I think is very important, and this is hard for people who have day jobs outside of academia, is that the research on this keeps evolving. Richard is right. We've learned a lot, and corporate systems are adapting to it, but the research itself is keep evolving. I'll give you a very clear example. There tends to be a notion, I think this is just a human bias, that more data is better. But there's research that shows that where language processing comes into play, more data has not proven to be better for the creation of algorithms that don't discriminate. This is actually the paper that led to the firing of the Black woman ethical AI leader at Google that, reveals a couple of the other layers of the onion of just how hard this is. So some way that civil society and nonprofits can be directly engaged, bring their expertise about the issues and the populations into the conversation is first and foremost. And secondly, realizing that there's a lot of independent research that calls into question some of our basic assumptions, and that civil society and academia can be a voice for bringing that forward. Because again, I'd never want to minimize, and maybe this is my US background, the profit-making incentive of the corporations that are creating most of these tools is their primary guiding incentive. And everything else is going to be a nice to have. And we as civil society, that's not our incentive. And that's where our expertise is critical. And thanks for sharing that paper. Yeah, Richard is right. And it's remarkable. It's research from within a company that said what you're doing is not right. And the result was the firing of the team that did the research. That's a systemic problem.
I think we've covered a lot. I really would like to thank you both. I don't know if there is any, last remark that you would like to make. We've got a couple of more minutes, and I don't want to leave without giving you the possibility to do it.
Well, I think it's like an unfinished conversation.
It is. So I think we're going to have to meet. We are going to have to meet again at some point.
Yeah, but no, I think we should be careful, with this powerful technology, but definitely not dismiss it, right, because of some negative impacts. And I think it's also a question. I mean, all the misery in the world, most of it is coming from people, not from machines. And sometimes we can ask, it's always a trade-off, it's a balance. So even if you use this technology, and you might harm people, but maybe if you not use the technology, you might even harm more people. So that's a very difficult decision, and actually it has nothing to do with technology. It's more ethics, and it's more even sometimes it's politics. So those decisions are not easily, you can't say this is wrong, or this is right, or this is bad, or this is good. It's all seen in context. Look, the countries that best managed COVID are China and South Korea, because they ignore completely privacy of data. So what do you prefer, privacy of life? I mean,
I guess my last thought on that would be that one of the things I'd hope civil society, nonprofits, and foundations will take from this conversation and others is that this is not something you can tick the box and be done with. The technologies keep evolving. What we understand about them keeps growing, and our dependency on them, as profoundly revealed by the pandemic, just keep expanding. And so we need to build into our awareness of how we think about the world a set of understandings and assumptions about the role of digital technologies, the companies that build them for the most part, not exclusively, and the governments that surveil them, and where that leaves us and our expertise and what our role is in advancing our missions and our collective responsibilities. It's not a one and done.
Absolutely not. And I think we've opened a conversation today. I really hope that this topic resonates with our audience. We had a lot of people enrolling for these sessions, so I understand that it appeals to them. We have shared some resources. We will, share with participants again, and also the recording of the sessions, so everyone can continue exploring the topic. And all is left from my side is to, thank you very, very much. I know it was a very early morning for Lucy. So thank you very much. Also to Richard, we had the opportunity as a Spanish Association of Foundations to meet with both of them in previous occasions. We thought that the work that you do is very relevant for foundations in Spain, and we are absolutely grateful for you to spend not only an hour of time today, because this has had some preparation, so quite a few hours to prepare for this session. So we hope to be in touch, and thank you very much. And I wish everyone a good rest of the day, good evening or afternoon, morning, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Hello.